latest podcast, the Heidelminicast.
It's a Heidelminicast. And now, Scott Clark.
What happened to the Dominion mandate?
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
Subscribe to the Heidelcast in any podcast app. Subscribe to the Heidelblog at heidelblog.net/subscribe. And download the app from the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. All these things will improve your life immeasurably. We have a text message, which I have nevertheless printed out so that it doesn't get lost. And this one comes from Brent, who says, "Hello, Dr. Clark. How do we understand the Dominion mandate in light of the new covenant?" And that is a very interesting question indeed. So let's, first of all, figure out what is the Dominion mandate. And he's referring to Genesis 1:28. And if you go back and just read through the creation narrative in Genesis 1, you see there's this pattern, and you have rulers and realms. In fact, going all the way back to Thomas Aquinas, he saw this pattern of rulers and realms. It's come to be known as the framework interpretation of the framework hypothesis, and people have gotten wound up about it, I think needlessly so, because, for example, Edward Joe Young, E.J. Young, whose conservative confessional credentials nobody doubts, in 1949, in his Introduction to the Old Testament, published by Tyndale Press in 1949, pages 50 and 51, saw in the creation narrative light and luminaries. They were parallels. Then a firmament and a division of the waters. That's number 2. Parallel to that, day 2, and this is day 5. So 1 and 4, and then day 2 and day 5. Birds and fishes are ruling. So luminaries are parallel to the light to rule the heavens, and birds and fishes and fishes particularly to rule the waters, and then day 3, dry land and vegetation is parallel to animals and man. And E.J. Young, Joe Young wrote, "But Genesis does not teach that the earth is the center of the universe or solar system. It is geocentric only in a religious sense. Not for an instant can its accurate statements be regarded as out of harmony with true science." Anyway, I think that's interesting. So that's one version of the framework, and there are others. And as I say, that recognition that there's a rulers and realms pattern to Genesis 1 that goes back to Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. And I'm sure before him, I just haven't looked. I don't imagine that Aquinas invented that. I think people have long noticed that there is a rulers and realms pattern in Genesis 1. So the culmination of that rulers and realms pattern. By the way, you can still hold to 6 days, 6 24-hour days, as people do, and there's nothing incompatible. Sometimes people talk about the framework hypothesis or the framework interpretation as if it commits one to any particular view of the length of the days. I myself don't think that Genesis intends to say anything at all about the length of the creation days. I don't think Moses cared, and I don't think that is anything to do with the point of Genesis. I don't think, God gave us Genesis 1 and 2 to answer 19th century questions from paleontologists and geologists. I think the reason the text is there, the reason the Holy Spirit inspired it infallibly, was to say to the Israelites and to us, this is the Lord who redeemed you, right? The same Lord who brought you out of Egypt through the Red Sea on dry ground by his sovereign power is the same God who spoke into nothing and made all that is, right? So creatio ex nihilo, creation from nothing, but also into nothing. That's how sovereign God is. And that's the point, is to keep nature and grace together, which is the thing to which we are coming. And that will really be the main point of this episode.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Clark.
So when you get to Genesis 1:28, right, we can go back to 27. That's really the high point of this part of Genesis, the Sabbath narrative really is the parallel, because you've noticed that all the 6 days have parallels with each other, but the seventh day, the Sabbath day, has no parallel. That's intentional. And that's a literary way, that God is calling attention to the fact that he has set aside 1 day out of 7. And under the types and shadows, it was the last day of the week. And under the new covenant, in light of the resurrection, it is the first day of the week. So that's fairly significant. So that I think is the big point, is rulers and realms, and in the seventh day. So if you're a 24-hour Christian, but you don't get the Sabbath, you don't get the Sabbath pattern, I would say that you've missed the point. You may be right about the length of the days. I don't know how anybody could know that for sure. None of us was there. And, you can say, certainly you have to say that there's a morning and evening. There is that pattern. But even Joe Young said in 1964, when he sort of came to critique aspects of the framework view, which he had earlier articulated, even then he said, you can't talk to me about solar days, which is the essence of 24 hours, until there's a sun, and that's not till day 4. So I think we all ought to exercise a certain degree of humility here, and there's a lot going on that it's hard to explain. How is there, how can you talk about a 24-hour day before a sun? Anyway, I think that's a fair question. So Genesis 1:27, you get to, so this is the high point of the 6 days, right? Not to the 7th yet. Verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. And we could do a whole episode on that, right? There's a lot of confusion about the fundamental truth here, that first we're created in the image of God. So it is God who defines us, not we who define God. And every human being is an image bearer. So that's very, very important. If you don't come away with anything else from this episode, you should come away with that, listener, that you are made in the image of God. If you're not a believer, then you're not recognizing your status as image bearer, and you are in rebellion, and God's going to hold you to account for not recognizing the fact that you are an image bearer and bending the knee and acknowledging the sovereign God who made you in his image. That's why you are special. That's why your life is worth something, because you are an image bearer. And when we forget that, when we have forgotten that, that's led to terrible consequences. And mass slavery, for example, that was one part of the evil of slavery in America, that we denied the status as image bearers of great masses of people just because they looked different from the people who were buying and enslaving them. And that was wicked. And, of course, we deny the status as image bearers of unborn humans. We do that regularly in the West, don't we? And that's led to a terrible consequences there, too. But anyway, verse 28, and God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea. This is the English Standard Version. And over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So that is the dominion mandate from Genesis 1:28, but in context of 1:27. So what do we make of that? And of course, to figure out this question and to answer the question as it is coming to us from Brent, we also have to look at Matthew 28:18 through 20, which is the Great Commission. So let's get that in front of us. And Jesus came, again, this is from the English Standard Version, and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So what do we do with that? The implied in Brent's question is the question, I guess, or the issue of whether the Great Commission radically transforms or wipes out even the creation mandate. So in order to answer that question and to figure this out, we have to make a very, very important distinction.
Call or text now, 760-618-1563.
The Heidelminicast.
And that distinction is between nature and grace. And we have to affirm that both of these realms are instituted by God, governed by God, ordained by God, and they persist, both of them simultaneously, side by side, until Jesus returns. And the temptation that we have to avoid is either to let creation wipe out grace, or, as more often happens, to allow grace, were it possible, to wipe out nature. This has been a battle that has gone on for a long time. Again, going back to Aquinas, and it wasn't really my intention to make this episode about Aquinas, but he gave us a very useful phrase. Grace, he says, does not destroy nature, non tollit naturam, doesn't destroy nature, but perfects it, or we might say renews it. I understand what Aquinas means, I think, but it'd be probably clearer and maybe more helpful for us in our context to say renews it. And this was an issue that existed in the 13th century because there were radicals who wanted, in a sense, grace to wipe out nature, or in whose theology grace, as it were, wiped out nature. And that still happens a lot. For a lot of American evangelicals, once you become a Christian, you can have no creational interest. So if you liked hiking and things, or painting, once you're a Christian, well, those are secular, they say, or those belong to your old life. And what they're really saying is that grace wipes out nature. Now, they don't put it that way because they don't think about these categories. They don't talk about these categories. They're probably not even aware these categories exist, but that's really what they are saying. And this is a debate that's been going on for a long time. It went on in the 16th century, and in the 17th century, the Reformed Orthodox regularly said to particularly the Anabaptists, and they named them, so that's what they were talking about, Anabaptists. They used that word. And they said, listen, you people are wrong because in your theology, grace wipes out nature. And that's not true. In fact, they quoted Aquinas, and typically these are Latin texts, and they quoted Aquinas in Latin, but they used the exact same language that I gave you. Grace does not destroy nature. It perfects it, or we might say renews it. So I think the Reformed were right. I think Aquinas was right. We need to affirm nature and grace, and we need to distinguish between the two. So Genesis 1:28 refers to our natural duty and our mandate, the commandment, if you will, the creation commandment or natural commandment. That's what a mandate is. A mandatum is a command in Latin. That's where we get that word. And so we have this obligation to exercise a degree of dominion as a matter of nature. And nothing about the new covenant wipes that out. We still have a responsibility as human beings to be fruitful and to multiply and to fill the earth and subdue it and exercise dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Now, people have sometimes interpreted dominion in ways that are probably not very helpful, but it is the case that we as image bearers, to sort of tie this together, Genesis 1:26 and 27, right, as image bearers of God, we reflect his dominion. And we are, as John Murray said, his vicegerents, not vice-regents, vicegerents. In other words, we are subordinates to God, and we rule the earth as his image bearers, as it were, in his place. And I think that continues. Now, we ought to be good stewards, and we ought to take good care of the earth that God has given us. And obviously, we haven't always done that. And we may be going through a certain degree of environmental hysteria in the late modern period. At least that's how it seems to me. But, be that as it may, that doesn't, the fact that people are sort of abusing the principle, right? The abuse of a principle doesn't wipe out the principle. And the principle still is that we are to take care of the earth that God has given us, and we are to exercise a certain degree of dominion over it, not cruelty. And when people hear dominion, sometimes they maybe think of cruelty. I'm not talking about that, but stewardship is what I'm talking about. Now, we also have a grace mandate. We have a creation mandate and we have a grace mandate. And the grace mandate is to go and make disciples. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to Jesus Christ, God the Son incarnate, and he has given us a great commission or a great mandate to make disciples. Now, we don't have to set those two things apart. He's established a visible institutional church. He gives that command to the visible institutional church, and it's the calling of the visible institutional church to preach the gospel, administer the sacraments, and to use the keys of the kingdom, including church discipline. Right? Those are, we say in the Belgic Confession, Article 29, the 3 marks of the true church, and those really, are the major duties of the visible institutional church. And so inasmuch as we live in a twofold kingdom, that is a creational, we might say, natural, you could even say secular sphere of God's sovereign providence over all things, we have responsibilities in that sphere, and that would include the dominion mandate, and we are citizens of the heavenly kingdom. If you're a Christian, right, you have this twofold citizenship, and you're part of God's twofold kingdom, or Christ's twofold kingdom, and you have responsibilities to the dominion of grace, exercised chiefly in the midst of the visible covenant community. We don't have to choose between the two, and nothing about the creation mandate wipes out the grace mandate, and nothing about the Great Commission or the grace mandate wipes out the creational mandate.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.
The best podcast